Hello and welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about data reflections. Data reflections are a feature that Dremio provides to make sure your queries run faster. Ultimately, data reflections improve performance by responding to a query while performing less physical work. To use an analogy, consider the following image. In San Francisco in the early 20th century, before the Golden Gate Bridge opened, to get from downtown to Sausalito, just on the other side of the bay, you had to drive over 200 miles and over 4 hours. After the bridge was open, the route was only 10 miles and about 20 minutes. Golden Gate Bridge allowed people to get from San Francisco to Sausalito by doing over 20 times less work. Similarly, data reflections allow you to execute queries more efficiently by doing less work. A reflection is a pre-computed persisted set of results in a Parquet format. Dremio also records along with the reflection the relational algebra that pertains to what part of the query can a reflection cover. What that leads to is the ability for Dremio to combine reflections to substitute the result of part of a query or all of it. So it is very common in a fairly complicated data model to create a data reflection that represents the join between multiple tables where you have done expensive operations such as creating new values or applying transformations. You can create a reflection on that, and then what Dremio will do is that when it receives the query, it will convert it to a relational algebra and see if any of the existing reflections can match part of that query or the entire query. If the entire query is not covered, then Dremio will push down to the data source the part of the query that the reflection didn't cover. Now let's take a look at a reflection in action. To create a reflection, you can go to the dataset that you want to work with and click on Reflections. There are two types of reflections. Row reflections are useful for most queries, including those that return a subset of rows, or what you call needle in a haystack. However, often analysis happen using BI tools like Tableau, where most queries involve one or more aggregations. Aggregation reflections summarize the data, pre-compute a number of measures, and gracefully handle data types for drill downs. They are invisible to the end user, so there is no need to connect to them physically or to change the SQL in order for an aggregation reflection to be substituted for the raw data. Depending on your situation, you can toggle the raw reflection or you can toggle the aggregation reflection. Once you're done adding dimensions and measures, you can click Save. In this case, I am going to explore a dataset that already has reflections created. To explore the reflections of a particular dataset, once you open the dataset, go to the reflection entry, and you will see what dimensions and measures are included in that reflection. To take a look at reflections that have been generated in your engine, go to the admin entry, acceleration, reflections, and you will see all the reflections that have been created on which datasets. Now, let's take a look at a data reflection in action. I am going to search for a dataset that contains data reflections already enabled in it. This is a dataset that contains New York City taxi ridership data. Here I can preview the data, and if I want to see the reflections, I'll go to the Reflections menu. You will see that the aggregation reflections have been toggled on, and here I can see the dimensions and measures. Now to analyze this data, I am going to use Tableau, and I am going to create a couple of queries that contain aggregations in it. I am going to select the total amount. Then another query could be the time distribution for this data set. If I want to see this on quarter over the year, I can see what the time distribution is quarter after quarter. When we're done running that query, I can go back to my jobs entry here in Dremio and see that in fact this query that I just ran from my ODBC client came back in less than a second, and it was accelerated by the aggregation reflection that belongs to that dataset. But what if you had a dataset that has not been aggregated, but it contains information that could be taken care for by this aggregation reflection? Let's take a look at how that looks like. If I go back and search for trips, I have a data set that contains trips and also temperature information for or weather information for the city of New York that is coming from a different data source. So these two have been linked together to create this virtual data set. Now I want to go ahead and analyze this data. Now I'm going to do a calculation of trip distances in average on the quarters. Now, when I go back to Dremio and take a look at the jobs, I can see that this query was in fact accelerated by the aggregation reflection that doesn't contain any information about the weather LME. So Dremio understood that it could decompose that query to use this acceleration to accelerate the query that we were executing and bring the results back to us in less than a second. It is important for you to follow best practices when creating reflections in your environment. To learn more about data reflections, please visit the assets below.